Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to do a video that's the culmination of about 6 weeks of different types of fabric sculptures that I've been sharing with you the process of making. I hope you've enjoyed all of those videos, the videos that have shown you how to make fabric sculptures with metal objects attached to them, how to rust up some beautiful textile pieces to create those beautiful orange patinas and those brown rust marks that I love so much. Also those really lovely small round sculptures that I've been sharing the process on how to make, the ones that have those little bits of stitching attached to them, the little bits of frayed lace that you might like to add to them that sit so beautifully either in a bunch or by themselves. And then of course those bindings that I've recently shown how to create really interesting textured pieces, binding up ropes, lengths of fabric, and also the beautiful knotting technique, that simple knotted technique that really sits beautifully on different tones of fabric. We're putting it all together today into this textile wall art piece. It's, to me, this is the art that I love to create, these beautiful, unique pieces that sit on my walls and remind me of all of the things that I love about creating. The marks, the colors, the fabric, the materials that I use, when you combine them together, they create really stunning pieces of art. So let's start creating this beautiful textile art piece together, and let's see what we can make. So to make the textile wall piece, you're going to need a few different things. You're going to need a selection of your fabric sculptures that you've been making. I mean, how many you need will depend on how big you want the wall piece to be. I've got a selection of some of the round fabric sculptures, some with some of the longer ones with some metal objects sewn into them. I've also made some longer pieces without a metal object sewn on the outside of it. I've got some of these beautiful bound fabric pieces. I've got some sticks and also some of the knotted pieces and the rope bounding. I've got, of course, some of the covered metal objects that I made earlier, and I've also got a few other things. I've got some pieces of metal objects that I collect along the way. Now, I'm not sure I'm going to be using them in the textile art piece, but I want to have options. Once it starts going together, I want to see, what else it needs. It might need a few metal objects, which I really like adding into my pieces. I've also got a pile of just some hemming, some lace, some bits of frayed fabric that I might use to fill in any gaps that occur when I sew all of my textile sculpture pieces together. I might have some gaps that I want to fill in with some other pieces of fabric. Other than that, I've got some embroidery thread, my scissors, I've got a normal needle, and I've also got a curved needle. That might be something you might like to play around with. I find it a little bit easier when I'm attaching the fabric sculptures to a base to use a curved needle sometimes. That's, as I said, that's something you might like to explore as you're sewing it all together. And other than that, you're going to need some kind of base to attach your fabric sculptures to. Now, there's a lot of choice when it comes to bases. Really, I'm looking for something that I can easily put my needle through, whether it's got holes in it or whether it's cane. Really thick, heavy placemats make really good bases. Or if you've got some small cane canisters that you would like to attach some fabric sculptures to, They look really good as well. And this is quite flimsy, but because it's quite small, you're only going to be able to attach a few pieces to it. So the thickness of it doesn't matter quite so much. But as you're getting into a larger, this one I think is just a mat to put a kettle or a hot plate on. This is getting a little thicker, which you need the bigger you get, because as you add fabric sculptures to it, of course it's going to, it needs to be a little bit heavier to hold up to the weight of all the sculptures you're attaching. So this is a good option. Metal grates work really well as well, especially for that industrial look, especially with your metal objects. Your bound sticks look really good on that. So that's something that you could use. This is just a plastic kitchen tray. It's easy to put my needle through. I can cover it if I want to cover the plastic. That's an option. The bigger placemats, this one's really thick, so it's quite sturdy and strong. Being of this size, it needs to be thicker, as I said, just to hold up to the weight of sewing on all your fabric bits. So they're really good to use and easy to put your needles through. And this one here, which I've already covered, is just an old grate from a barbecue. Which I like using as well. Easy to attach pieces to, and I've covered it so I don't see the grid underneath the fabric sculptures. You might like the grid effect, but I'll show you how to cover up the base if you don't want the base showing in itself. I'll show you that up next. So as I said, there's a lot of choices you can use for your bases. Really anything that is either has a hole that you can get a needle through, or is soft enough, or of a material that it's easy to get the needle through as well. So that's about all you'll need. I'll show you next up how to cover the base if you want to hide the look of the base underneath your fabric sculptures, or as I said, you can leave the cane base as it is, or even the plastic or metal if you want that look. If you don't want your base showing through once you start attaching your fabric sculptures to it, it's an easy process to simply cover it with a piece of material, which I've done on this one. This is actually the side that I will be using to attach all of my fabric sculptures to. I didn't particularly want the grid-like effect of the barbecue plate to be showing underneath the fabric sculptures. I mean, you might like the effect, but for this one, I didn't want to have it showing, so I simply covered it with a spare piece of material. I think it's just a piece from an old sheet that I had. So it's a simple process of grabbing your base. Now, if you want to cut, you can leave it as is. If you don't like the look of your base or you want to cover it, grab a spare piece of material like so. This one's a little bit, just actually an old cut off piece from another piece I was working on, and simply cut a hem around it that you can fold over and sew on to your base to cover over it. Any material will do. You might like to use a lovely contrasting color underneath it, like a really dark piece of fabric would look good underneath it, because it does, if it does peek through, then you've got this really beautiful visual contrast of the color underneath. But for this one, I'm going to just use, it's just an off-white color. I'm going to fill in most of the wall art, so you're not going to be seeing any of the base. So it didn't particularly worry me what color material I was going to use to cover it. So then it's a simple matter of folding the material over just to give it a nice hem, lining it up, of course, to make sure it's going to cover the whole way around. You might like to tack it and pin it to make sure it doesn't slip as you're sewing. Grab your needle with your embroidery thread and simply push it through and start sewing all around the rim of your base with the piece of fabric that will cover it, tucking the fabric as you go. I'm just doing a simple stitch to secure the fabric to it. Going all the way around, tucking the material as I go. Okay, so I've stitched all around my base. I've needed some more cotton as I've gone along. You can see the knots at the back where I've just added and cut off lengths of cotton. It's not going to show, as I said, because it is on the back now of the back of your textile art piece. What's a good time to do now is to grab another piece of fabric. I'm using the same piece that is the same type of fabric that's on the front, but it could be any piece of fabric. I want to cut another circle that I'm going to then sew over the top of the back once it's finished, just to hide all of the stitches and the knots from when I attach all of my fabric art pieces to it. So I'm going to once again do another circle, leaving a bit of a hem that I can use when the piece has all been sewn up. It's a lot easier to cut this circle out now before I start attaching the fabric sculptures to it, because it's a nice flat circle. Just makes it a lot easier than trying to cut a circle from the piece once all of it's piled high with all the sculpture pieces. And I'll just simply put it aside for when I have finished. So there we go. That's my second circle that I will add to the back of it once I've sewn on all of my textile sculptures. So now we get to the fun part, arranging all of our beautiful fabric sculptures onto the base of our wall art. As you can see, this is my covered base, and I'm looking at all of the different sculpture pieces that I've got here, and straight away I'm recognizing a color pattern that appeals to me, the textures that appeal to me, and how I can put it all together into one solid piece, I guess. Take your time at this stage. This is the stage where you get to play around with colors, with shapes, with tones, with different materials, and see how they all work together. There's a lot to choose from, and it does get a little confusing if you try to rush this process. But so I really encourage you, take your time, play around with different color combinations, with different shapes, with different textures, and see how it all sits together and tells a story together. So I've been working a while on my art piece, changing my mind, trying different colors, different combinations. I've got the main players, I guess I could call them, of the piece now laid out. I've worked out I liked the idea of having the darker tones at the top and the lighter tones at the bottom. I've played around with some of the more rigid pieces like the sticks and the metal objects, seeing how they all work together to create a shape that I really like. And of course then working how it all sits together, which is, you know, it's quite a tricky little process. But as I said, if you take your time, don't put any pressure on yourself. And I find it really helps if I take photos along the way. As the piece evolves, I can change my mind on colors. Once I see a bit in the photo that I think to myself, oh, the area is too dark, I'll add a lighter piece to that area, take another photo, and then compare the photos side by side, and you can really see the difference in just small changes that you've made in your piece. Now, it's not going to look exactly like this once I finish sewing it all together. I know that I'll either change my mind on a piece, or a piece will sit differently once it's sewn together. But I know the main feel of what I want for the art piece has now been finished. I've got some leftover bits that I can add to it later. As I said, there's going to be little areas where I want to cover up the base, so I'll add some little bits of trimmings, some hems, or even just some more small rope pieces as well. And I might also add this beautiful rusty latch later, which I really like, all these hanging pieces. Plus I've got this nice piece of grey rope that I really like too. So it will evolve as I start to sew, but the main feel of it, I think I'm really happy with this. I've also kept this piece of metal here. I'm thinking of using it as a hanger once the piece is finished sewing it onto the back, so I've got something to hang it onto the wall with. So I've kept that aside. The thing I like to do now this is my process. I'm just sharing you the process that I do as I make these pieces. You might find it a little easier to do it a different way, but what I tend to do is I've now taken a photo of this last layout that I'm happy with. I will take off the thicker pieces like the sticks, trying not to disturb the main sculpture area itself. I'm going to take off this one too, which is the metal hook. And I'm going to just leave in, as I said, I've taken a photo of it so I know where they can be added to it once I've finished this loose sewing part. So what I like to do now is grab some embroidery thread. I don't knot the end. It's just a single thread. And what I tend to do is go along just skimming the surface with my needle, with my thread, and loosely joining all of the pieces together. So when I flip it over to start sewing from the back, the pieces don't move around. Now, you might like to just add your pieces individually, one at a time, but I quite like this way because I said it keeps the general feel of the pieces together when I flip it over to start sewing from the back. So I will simply start from this end here, grab my needle and just travel loosely through the pieces, not knotting it, leaving a long string at the end, and then just simply, as I said, I call it just skimming the pieces and just loosely sewing them in the order that I want them to be placed on the base once I start sewing it from the back. So simply sew. And once, of course, I've flipped it back over, after I've sewn on the back, I'll flip it back over and I'll pull these threads out. So they're not visible. They're just, as I said, I guess it's just a way of tacking without using pins. So I'll simply go along and travel through all of the different pieces so they kind of don't lose their place. once I flip it over. So I'll come back with another bit of thread and join it up around here. For now, I'll just join up all of the circle sculptures or the round sculptures. Cut the needle off. No, as I said, no knots in it, and just thread it up again and continue the process to, as I said, just to keep the pieces in the places that I wanted to keep them because I've liked this design. So I've passed the needle through the fabric sculptures a few times, attaching them loosely all together. As I said, once I've finished actually securing it from the back, I'll pull all of these cotton threads out so they won't be visible on the finished piece. But for now, it holds it a little more securely in place for when I flip it over and start sewing on the back. I'm not going to lose, I guess, that design that I've created with all of the pieces so far. So the next step is I'm going to just grab a spare piece of cloth, just anything you've got lying around. It's not going to be used anything other than to help me keep it all together as I flip the whole piece, including the base, over. So I'm just going to flip it over, rearrange it all a little bit, and as you can see, I've got the reverse pattern then of all of my fabric sculptures, and they've held together really quite well. I can see the design of it's pretty much as it was before I flipped it over. So I'm simply going to line this up, tuck that top bit in a little because I know they were sitting at the top, and now this piece is ready to start working on sewing from the back. Now I thought I'd make mention too that I purposefully took this the bound sticks and the metal objects off of it before I started sewing the piece, the fabric sculptures together before I flipped it. I will be adding them once I've secured the fabric sculptures onto the back. I'll be using, I'll flip it over and I'll simply be using stitching from the front, or sometimes even wire to attach those pieces a little bit later, which is the reason why I've taken them off before I started sewing the sculptures together before I flipped them. Now I've threaded up my curved needle. It's a double thread with a knot at the end, and I'm going to start attaching the small pieces of fabric sculptures to the actual base now. And it's a simple matter of simply feeling your way through. I generally start in the middle. I mean, you can start anywhere. I can feel the sculpture underneath, and I can feel that my needle has gone through it. So all I simply do is gather it up and pull my needle through, and then I will hook it over the metal grid lines as I go, and just simply continue to sew the pieces on. I can tell when the needle is going through a small textile sculpture. I can feel the pull of the sculpture as I sew it through, and then I will simply go along. Now, once I've done this for quite a while, and I feel like I've gathered the majority of the pieces up onto the back of the piece, I'll do a little flip over and see if there's any areas that need more attention, more stitching, if there's any more small fabric sculptures that aren't secure enough. I'll add some more stitches into that area, but for the first run, I'll simply start adding stitches and pulling up all of the pieces of fabric from the pieces that are sitting on the front of the piece here. As I said, as you can see, the curved needle makes this process a lot easier. It's just a lot easier to get the needle over, under and over, really. That's it, they're starting to feel quite secure. And as I said, I will continue along, feeling my way around, feeling for the pieces underneath, and just simply giving them a sew through. And of course, once the thread is finished on this, I'll tie it off and rethread my needle. This is the back of the piece, so I'm not looking for pretty, I'm just looking to secure the textile, the fabric pieces as securely as possible before I flip it over. And then of course I might have to add a few extra stitches either from the back or even together along the front too. But I know the majority of the stitching will be done on the back here, and it will be quite invisible from the front then. So a few stitches later, I've pretty much secured all of my fabric textile pieces to the base. I know they're secure because when I lift it up like this, nothing is falling off. It's all seeming quite secure, and when I turn it over and give it a little nudge, I can see everything's sitting quite firmly on the base, which is exactly what I want. Now, you might notice there's a few gaps showing now that we've sewn our fabric pieces on. Don't worry about the gaps. This is where the beautiful hems, frills, bits of metal come into play when we start filling up these areas. You can also fill up the areas with some more round sculptures or some more ropes, whatever you have at hand, but we'll be building that up now as we go along. The next thing I'm going to do, of course, is take off all of these threads, all of the threads that I use to just tack, in a sense, all of the pieces together before I sewed them onto the base. I'm simply going to cut them, pull them off so they're no longer visible. And then what I'm going to do is attach the these beautiful bound pieces of sticks and the hook that I had already worked out where to put them, and then I'm going to start filling in some areas with, as I said, the frills, the laces and the hems, and also look at maybe some of this bigger area here in particular. Do I want to add another round sculpture to it, or do I want to add some bound washes or something in there as well? So that's when I can start playing with filling it in. I'll add them one at a time and sew directly onto the back from here. So it's an easy way of adding in some more as I go, and I'll simply build up the piece as it progresses. Now you might notice as you're pulling the strings of cotton off that there's a few loose bits of sculptures that you haven't quite caught behind. It's a perfect time to do that, just simply sew from behind and just secure. I notice this little guy here hasn't been secured because he was sitting up a little higher. I know where he is, and I'll flip it back over and simply attach him once I've got all the rest of these pieces of cotton off. So I'm at the point where I've got a few different gaps that I want to fill in with different types of sculpture pieces or some metal objects, pieces of interest that will really tie the piece together. I've left this deliberately, as you saw earlier, for the bound sticks. So I know that they're going to go there, or at least one or two are going there. I've got some areas that I would probably put some round sculptures in as well, and then I'll play around with different bound metal objects, maybe bits of rope or something, see how they sit amongst everything else that I've sewn down onto the base. This is the time you might like to add some artificial flowers or strings of bead or any ornaments that mean something to you. I will simply pop them in place like this little guy here, squeeze him in so he looks like he belongs, and then sew from the back base all the way up and attach him in and go along and add everything else to fill it all in completely. Now, there's some things that I might wire onto the base. There are some things too I might wire together. Say these little wired, I think they're just ties, little wire ties. I might wire them all together in a little block and attach them as a block. Same with these little washer things. I can wire them together or even attach them with a string together and hang them from here as a visual display. These ones too would look good. This is really up to you. This is your project that you really, I guess you can put your own stamp on them. They all look so incredibly different depending on who is making them, what type of materials you're using, and of course your own artistic eye, what you like, what you don't like. I love making them. As I said, they give me the opportunity to not only put all of these beautiful little fabric sculptures together, but it creates a really interesting and quite artistic display. When you put them all together, there's a conversation with a whole heap of different materials when they're put together rather than sitting individually, which I like. So I'm going to get started and start filling in some of the spaces that I can see on my piece. And as I said, it's a matter of trying some things, seeing how they look. Does the shape of it enhance my piece, or does it need something totally different? Sometimes I will just have a space left that I'm just hunting for a particular object or sculpture that just seems to belong there. And it might take me a while to find it, but I eventually do. I'm just going to try a whole heap of different things, see what works, see what doesn't work, and continue to build on my wall piece. I tend to place them all down before I then will pull them off individually and then start sewing them. I might take some photos along the way so I remember where a particular piece goes, how it sits, what angle it sits on, or sometimes I'll just surprise myself and attach something that really just works. It was a total surprise how well it works. I do know I want to cover this edge here, so I know that this guy, I'm going to sew him somewhere here, so I'm thinking of then using this frayed bit of lace maybe to sew along the edge so it breaks, not only hides the stitches, but it breaks that really sharp round edge, which I'm not after. And then I'll continue to fill in all of these little spaces with probably some little bits of material, little bits of lace, until I just build up this beautiful textural feel to it that I really love making. So I've worked out pretty much overall the pieces I want to use. This area here is still a little unresolved. I'm looking to sort of shake up that curve bit and that curved area a little bit, but I'm not quite sure on what I'm going to use at the moment. But what I am going to do, I've got a lot of pieces that I've added to it that I can start sewing on, and I know that once I start forming it, I'll get a clearer idea on what I think should happen here, what seems to fit it a little bit better. So I'm going to just leave that area for now. I've taken a photo of it, so I'm just going to remove the bits that I haven't used and take off the bits that I've added, and I'll start sewing them in piece by piece. There was that guy. I think that was already sewn in, so I'll probably do this guy first. These little bits are jammed in quite tight, so I'm going to leave them in and I'll probably sew them on. I'll attach probably this little hinge with a bit of wire. I've got 2 holes in it here, so I can just simply string some old rusty wire through that so it'll look nice hanging down. I'll move these pieces because they're going to fall off before I sew them, like so. And I might leave him in too. So I'll start sewing this little guy on this one, and these pieces that I've jammed in, I'll secure them, flip it over, do some stitches, secure them in, flip it back right side again, and add some more as I as I go along. So I'm simply adding, sewing some on, adding some more, sewing them on, and so on until I've got all of these pieces here sewed onto the base. I've had a wonderful afternoon filling in my art piece. I've added a few more round sculptures to it where there was a few spaces where I could add a few. I've added in all my hems and trimmings. I attached my sticks, my bound sticks to it, and also my metal objects. Sat with it for a while, see if I needed to add anything else to it. It's a conversation you have with yourself and all of the materials that you use. When to stop is a big question. You know, the more I add, is it taking away from the piece or is it adding to the piece? Is it starting to look too full? Does it need a particular something somewhere? I love that part of it. I love that creating part of it. And although it gets a little frustrating at times because I want it finished and I'm not quite sure, you know, where something needs to be, I know that eventually I'll resolve it if I take my time, experiment, play around with different bits and pieces, and I know at the end I'll make something that I really like. I've just done the mock handle at the top just to get it sort of orientated with the handle to see how the metal shapes are sitting on the edges. Now it's time to add my backing cloth. I could attach my handle to the back, my back grill that I covered, and then put the backing piece of material over the top. Or I could add the handle after I've done my backing material, which I'll probably do because I like the look of having that wire hanger sort of shown, visible on the back. So what I simply do for the backing, I'm going to put a piece of material over the top. So when I flip it over, I'm not going to get any bits of rusty marks or any more than I've already got on this white piece of paper, because I know my rusty hooks and latches and stuff throw a bit of rust sometimes. So I'm just trying to keep my paper a little bit clean. So I'm going to flip it over. There's my hanger. As you can see, I'll just lay this piece of material down. It's very secure. Nothing is falling off. Everything feels really solid and well attached, which is a good sign, because else I'd have to go and add some more stitches to some of the pieces. Nothing's moving around. It's sitting really well. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to get that round piece of cloth that we cut earlier, making sure that it still fits with a bit of an overlay, which it does, which is good. There's actually quite a lot of overlay in it. If it's only a little bit of overlay, sometimes I'll tack a little bit of sewing here, 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 and here, just to keep it in place as I sew around it. But I probably won't need it with this one, because as I said, there's a lot of hem and a lot of overlay in it, and I don't think I'm going to sew too close to make the allowance over here shrink too much. Fingers crossed anyway. So it's a simple matter of, I will hem it over like so. And I'm going to just make sure it's in camera for you. I'm going to sandwich it together a little bit and simply sew it together. My first stitch will be hidden under this white backing. And I will simply, just quickly line it up again. It doesn't hurt to double check. Hold it into place, and I will simply do an over and under stitch. Get my material to sit nicely. Over like so, pulling the thread. It's early morning here, and of course the thread, the needle, doesn't quite work sometimes early in the morning, and I will simply go around the entire back. Finding my place here and getting a rhythm going. Stitching as I go, squeezing it a little together, like so. The thread really doesn't want to behave this morning. Like so. And then I'll just simply tuck the cloth around as I get to it, like this, marrying it up to the edge. So I've got a nice stitch close that hides that back with all of those little stitches on. Of course, you don't have to do a backing piece if you want to. I find it finishes it off nicely, but it's not it's not a crucial part of it if you don't want to put a backing piece of material on. And that's it. It's simply under, over. I'm not gathering the wire grill that is my backing piece. I'm just gathering up the material that is along the edge, closing it up as I go. Well, I ended up getting my thread to behave itself, and I've added the backing piece of fabric onto my backing board, or in my case, the grill, that barbecue grill I was using. I've also just sewn a couple of stitches onto my hanging piece here, this old piece of wire that I'm going to use as a hanger. What I ended up doing is, to do the entire rim of it, I used about 4 different pieces of thread, and after I had thread them through the needle, I started sewing in different spots around my circle. So I started at the bottom. The next time I needed to rethread my needle, I started here, used up all the thread, and then started across here, and then the last one across here, pulling the fabric backing quite tight as I was sewing, which gives this really lovely tight look to the fabric rather than having it all wrinkly. It worked really well. I'm really happy with the result. And as you can see now, I'll flip him over. Show him here. I can see my face somewhere. It actually looks great because he's actually quite a larger piece of wall art. It's actually finished. There's something really unique and organic about these pieces when you start adding all of these beautiful sculptural elements to it. They take on a life of their own, and I really enjoy making them. So I hope you enjoy making your own piece of wall art, and I hope you really enjoy the process and the exploration that comes with making these beautiful pieces. So thanks very much for watching the video, and once again, happy creating.